Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Well, human rights, it really has stimulated a lot of thinking in social work in the years since that 1994 UN paper was published. I want to continue our investigation of human rights and social work, thinking about the ideas of a really interesting social work author, a critical social work author, called, I think, Jim Ife. I hope I'm saying his name right. The name is unusual and it's pronounced a bit differently, whether it's a forename or surname. So I hope I'm not saying his name wrong. Yeah, maybe I should just call him Jim throughout this presentation. Let's recap where we were in our last presentations. I was giving you legal perspectives on human rights. I was noting one way of using human rights in social work is to be inspired by the rights as they're expressed in our conventions, in our country's constitutions, and so on. So very much a legal approach, relating human rights in our legal documents, in our charters and our treaties, to our social work practice, and being kind of led by this legal framing of human rights. So laws, conventions, constitutions, they determine our perspectives. That's what we hold on to. That's the bottom line. Can we criticize this approach? Is there anything wrong with doing it like that? As I noted, many authors like this approach. What could we say about that? Pause here and natter with your partner. Well, it's probably best if I be inspired by Ife's ideas here. He acknowledges this approach himself and he's using it in some of his work. Nonetheless, he knows it has many problems, and actually it's not his preferred way of using human rights in social work. He's very much moving away from a legal approach to human rights. Many rights, he notes, and I'm really referring to ideas from his book here, they're protected in law, but much law is very difficult to enforce in practice. For example, he notes freedom of speech in the family. The 3 or 4 or 2, whatever members of the family have that right to freedom of speech in the family. You can't really protect that legally, can you? You don't really have access, to the means to protect that legally. So you may have rights which are not really enforceable anyway. I was also concerned that such legal perspectives may mistakenly make us think of human rights as being fixed. The logic is human rights are those things written down in particular places. They're written in stone. They're unchanging. It's in that convention which is going to be valid for the rest of time. Now, this isn't how human rights are at all. Human rights are evolving in a very natural way as we as human beings collectively think about ourselves, what it means to be a human being interacting with others. So human rights are actually progressing, they're moving on, they're constantly developing. And who knows what view of human rights our grandchildren will have in, say, 50 years' time. It's really quite unclear today what view of human rights we're going to have in the future. For example, at the moment, human rights are mostly individual human rights, they're rights claimable by individuals. It may be the case in a few decades that we'll have collective human rights. So a community will have community rights, human rights as community rights. It's already a trend with these third generation human rights, which people are thinking about. So human rights is a fluid changing thing. Hanging on to those laws is problematic because it suggests the opposite. Good. Ife proposes an alternative view of human rights. I think it's interesting, and that's why I'm going to talk about it now. He uses interesting jargon here. He says rights are discursively constructed and rights are reflexively constructed. And let's look at these one by one. When Ife says that human rights are discursively constructed, he's noting they arise as people think about rights and responsibilities together in a cultural context. So yes, you're thinking of 2 or more individuals coming together, and in their interactions, in their dialogue, they're thinking about their rights and responsibilities. So that's his first point. They come about in discourse. Then he says that they're reflexively constructed. They arise as people interact in everyday situations. So people are interacting with one another, and these people are finding consensus on how to treat one another. There's almost a form of kind of negotiation here going on. The consensus is based on our common humanity. We're 2 human beings coming together. And that's why there's a natural potential for consensus there, because of our experiences, our lives as common human beings. So what his approach is doing is stressing the way in which rights are interconnected with responsibilities. Rights are negotiated collectively in our interactions, in our everyday interactions. Ife envisages social workers in their work, using this approach, this discursive, reflective approach. Social workers are interacting with their service users, their clients. They're meeting them at eye level. They're meeting them as equals. And they're encouraging their service users to see their needs. It's a common social work term, their needs. And in German, it's even worse. We sometimes say problems. So seeing the problems, seeing the needs in the language of human rights. As a concrete example, the service user expresses their need for a job, okay? And the client can re-express that as a right instead, okay? So instead of saying what's the needs or what's the problems, you can say, what rights are not being met? What human rights are not being met? The right to employment here. The worker and service user, and I'm quoting Ife here, act together towards the goal of achieving human rights. And Ife is inspired by Brazilian ideas from Paulo Freire, the great Brazilian pedagogue, and his ideas of praxis, which are also well worth checking out. I can thoroughly recommend that. There's definitely bridges here. And again, this is the critical social work part of Ife's background here. So again, I present this to you, and again, I heartily recommend the book, but I'm leaving it with you as social workers or social work managers. What do you think of Ife's suggestion here to move away from a narrow legal reading of human rights? Is it wise to look at unmet human need as violated human rights instead? Is that a helpful reframing or reformulating? Can you imagine using his approach to apply human rights in your own social work? Is this useful to you? Ultimately, that's the test. You're going to have to dip into the literature and check it out, but I really can enthusiastically recommend you to do that. Here you are. And if you don't want to cope with this weighty book, there's a lovely paper which I stumbled across in a great collection of critical social work papers that will do just as well. Let me come to a close for now. Thanks for your interest. Thanks for listening, everybody.